Well, welcome to Halfway There. I'm Eric Nevins, and this is the show where we have honest conversations with ordinary Christians about today's Christian experience. I'm here today with John Swanger, and he is going to share a story with us today. So, John, I want to welcome you to Halfway There.
Well, thank you very much, Eric. I am honored to be invited to your show.
Well, you came highly recommended, and I'm excited to just speak with you and hear a little bit about your story. And I know that you've done some writing. I can't wait to talk about that as well. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do now and kind of where God has you, and then we'll go back and see what He's done in your life.
Our ministry has evolved over the years. 24 years ago, the Lord called us to feeding the homeless. And so me and my wife started Cross and Cleft Ministries to reach out to the hungry, hurting, and homeless. We started making sack lunches and heading them out on the streets of Denver, Colorado. We were feeding 250 people a day, 6 days a week. And we did this for about 22 years.
Wow.
Then God moved us into prison ministry, which, by the way, I've been trying to get into ever since I became a believer. We finally got into prison ministry and started ministering in different prisons throughout the country. We were all over Colorado. I ministered in Arizona, in the Alaska unit of Arizona State prisons. And then we ministered in Texas prisons and Florida state prisons and a couple of federal prisons along the ways. And finally, up here, we are ministering more in juvenile facilities. You know, it just touches my heart to think all these years we've been ministering to people that have already gone down the wrong road. And it's refreshing to be able to catch some of them before they go down the road and say, look, you don't have to go the path that I went.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I am so excited to hear about that path. I know that you came to Christ later in life. Tell us about what your life was like before that.
Well, growing up, I was in a broken family. We grew up in the South. My mom was married 4 times, but the majority of my childhood, she was single, trying to raise 5 kids on a waitress's salary. She did the best she could, but sometimes it just wasn't enough to make ends meet for all of us. Me and my younger brother were sent to orphanages in Texas twice, and we were in a juvenile facility simply because she couldn't take care of us. She was in a hospital. But the third stepfather of mine, her 4th husband, was a thief. And while your dad was teaching me how to swing a bat or catch a ball, mine was teaching me how to hotwire cars and pick locks. I ended up stealing cars with him. He raised me to be a thief. And then he kicked me out of the house at 16 years old, gave me $10 and told me to leave.
Wow.
I ended up connecting with a couple of other people, older, a 19-year-old girl and a 43-year-old man, and we started robbing supermarkets throughout Texas, big like Safeways and other chain supermarkets like that. And then we worked our way along the southern route and up through California and Oregon to Seattle, Washington. And we lived up here and started robbing banks. In 1971, October 6th of 1971, I was arrested in Mizpah, Minnesota by the FBI, and they extradited me to Seattle for trial. I was convicted of 2 counts of bank robbery, and I pled guilty to a 3rd count in exchange for them dropping multiple other charges. After that, the FBI called me and one of the guys in that robbed with me, Bill, the older gentleman, and they made a deal with us that they had a list of robberies that they suspected we did. And if we could clean the list up, they would guarantee we wouldn't be charged with any more crimes. It turned out there was 157 robberies total that we had committed. At that time, the FBI told us that of all the famous robbers in the world, Butch Cassidy, Sundance Kid, Dillinger, Babyface, Nelson, Pretty Boy, Floyd, Bonnie and Clyde, all of them, if you take Hollywood and legend out, the greatest of them robbed 22 places. It's just Hollywood tends to blow it up and urban legend blows it up. So then they brought out another file of a guy in New Jersey in 1960-62. He had robbed 52 places, and they has always considered him the most prolific of all robbers in the United States. And they told us, you guys don't realize this, but you tripled the record. And I was sent to prison. I was sentenced to 3 10-year sentences.
Wow. John, did you have any idea that that's where you were?
No.
No. That's incredible.
I did not realize it. I didn't realize how incredible it was until God started showing me, he can keep people from ever straying, and he can snatch people from the brink of hell. And God just wanted me to know how far down I was that road before he grabbed me.
Yeah.
But I was sentenced to 3 consecutive 10-year sentences in prison. And God started working in my life right away. I was sentenced the very next morning. I woke up and my attorney came to the jail to visit me and said, he said, do you believe in God? And I said, no, not really. I don't disbelieve in him. And he goes, well, God or somebody is smiling on you because a federal judge in Baltimore, having nothing to do with this case, made a ruling that sentences of a similar nature have to be concurrent. So when I was originally sentenced to 3 10-year sentences consecutive, that was a 30-year sentence. Overnight, it switched to 1 10-year sentence. And so that cut my time right there. I ended up going to the federal prison in Lompoc, California. They moved me from Seattle to Lompoc. I served 1/3 of that sentence and received a 7-month parole date. So I ended up getting out of prison just under 4 years of time served. I was supposed to serve my remaining 6 years on parole. I served just under 3 and they cut me loose because I did it clean. I never did get in trouble again. Then I moved to Canada and formed a band and put it on the road and played professionally for 4.5 years. I played guitar, blues harmonica, and was the lead singer of the band Sweetwater, Texas. But 4.5 years on the road, the whole thing fell apart. We got sick of the road, sick of each other, and I ended up leaving and moving to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Although I'd stayed clean and sober and crime-free for all that time, but once I hit Oklahoma, all that started to fall back apart. I ended up riding with a couple of motorcycle gangs, 1%ers, and I was dealing coke. I had 4 dealers that I supplied cocaine to, and I was the head bouncer at a place called The Strip, which was a little strip mall, had 9 topless joints and 2 nude joints all in the same parking lot. And I ran the whole thing. I had 300 dancers working under me and 65 bouncers.
Wow. I just said, wow, that's incredible. Okay, go ahead.
So I want to just tell you about working at the Strip. I would watch when people walk in the door. Every guy that walked in the door, I would kind of case him out as to what if I have to whip this guy, what's it going to take? Some guys I would think, oh, I just a roundhouse to the nose. Another guy, an uppercut. A third guy, I'll just slap that guy. But everyone that came in, I knew a way I could whip them. And I had a rule with the bouncers. If you lose the fight, you're fired. Nothing personal, but I pay you to control the bar. And if a guy whips you, who's in control?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so Everybody came in. I knew I could whip them. I wasn't afraid of anybody except for one guy. It was a big guy named Tony, a huge black guy. He was about 6'4" and about 280 pounds, and he was a brick. He was solid. And I would watch him come in, and I go, "That's the guy that's going to take my job." I knew that I could not handle him. So one day I'm walking from bar to bar and just sticking my head and checking on people. And I walk in one of the bars, and Tony is there right in the middle of the floor, got his arms up in the air, and he's yelling. And Tiger, the little lady that owns the joints, she had her hands up on his chest, reaching high to try and hold him back. And she's saying, "Calm down, Tony, calm down." There were like 4 bouncers standing around this action in a circle. And there was a girl behind Tiger, and he's pointing his hand over at her and saying, "You're going to work for me or I'm going to kill you." Tony was a pimp. And as this was happening, I was walking over toward them. And then all of a sudden, he reached in his pocket and he pulled a gun out and he reached over Tiger to shoot this girl. And I jumped on his back and started wailing on him. All the bouncers hit the door. Tony turned around and I was beating on his face. And I got hit over the head with the gun right in the forehead. And I was getting kind of fuzzy, but I got him on the ground. I was sitting on his chest, pounding on him. And I was thinking, I've got to knock this guy out, because if I pass out, he's going to kill me. And just in the middle of me beating on him, somebody reached in with a banana knife and laid it on his throat. I looked over, and there was this Mexican-looking guy there with long braids. He was in leathers. He was obviously a biker. He had a Fu Manchu mustache and a bandana on his forehead. And he says to me, "You look like you could use a break, man." I said, "Yeah, I could." And he goes, "You go ahead. I got him." And then he turned to Tony and he said, "Tony, you move. I'm going to put your neck in your back pocket." I walked over to the bar. I did 2 lines of coke off the bar, and I downed a beer real quick and shook the cobwebs out of my head and went back over there. I sat on Tony's chest, and this guy moved the knife out of the way, and I started pounding on him again. I knocked him out, and we took these zip ties, those plastic police riot handcuffs. And I cuffed this guy, and we drug him out the back door and laid him in the alley. I came back in and walked over to the guy with the banana knife, introduced myself. He said his name was James Hughes. I had never seen the guy before in my life, but I feel like he saved my life that night. So I closed the bar down early, and I just told everybody to go home, and I told James Hughes, "Thank you." I went out and I got on my motorcycle, and I started heading home. I lived in the southeast. I worked in the southeast corner of Tulsa, and I lived in the northwest corner. So it's about 30 miles across there to where I live. And I ride home. And there's a little convenience store right next to my apartment building there. And I used to stop in there every night on the way home, just to impress the nerd that worked behind the counter. I wanted him to see that here's this tough biker guy on a motorcycle with another chick on the back. I would stop, even if I didn't need anything, I would stop just to try to impress him. I mean, talk about a stupid ego. Impressing the nerd in the convenience store was more important to me than taking the girl home. I just wanted to impress everybody.
Yeah.
So it was kind of strange. But this time I'm almost home, and I realize I'm out of cigarettes. So I whip into the little Quick Trip convenience store. And as soon as I do, I realize I'd made a mistake, because here I am with no girl on the back of my motorcycle. And there's Jack, the nerd that works in there, waving at me, "Come on in," because I had been coming in there for a couple of months, and we were on a first name basis. I would always walk in and say, "What's happening, Jack?" And he would go, "You are John." And then we would talk. But he never told me he was a Christian. I mean, in fact, if he had told me, I probably would have never gone back in there. I didn't like Christians. They just seemed like nerds, and weak people.
Did you know any Christians before then? Like how?
My grandmother.
Oh, interesting.
My grandmother was the only Christian I knew,
Okay.
and I mean, she's nice. I love her, but I don't want to marry somebody that looks like her,
Uh-huh.
you know.
Yeah.
So, so I walk in, and Jack says, "I see you're not busy tonight, John. Come in, let me buy you a cup of coffee." So I got a cup of coffee and a pack of smokes and all that went up. And he starts talking to me. He says, the reason I'm in town? I said, why is that? And he goes, I'm going to a little college out here in a town called Broken Arrow. And I go, okay, I didn't know there was a college out there. And he said, it's called Rhema. I said, what the heck's a Rhema? And he goes, it's a Bible college. Well, the hair just stood up on my neck. And then I thought, I just handled the toughest guy in the world, and he had a pistol. I could whip this guy, this little wimpy Christian.
Yeah.
So I'm not worried about him. And so he said, I've been telling my wife about you, and she thinks you sound cool. And he said, tomorrow night is Tuesday night. That's my night off, and it's your night off also. Would you like to come over for dinner? She wants to cook you a home cooked meal. And he said, when was the last time you had a home cooked meal? And I said, does prison count? Because if prison doesn't count, I'm not sure I ever had a home cooked meal.
Wow.
And so I said, yeah, I can come. And he goes, by the way, James Hughes is going to be there. And I'm thinking, this is crazy. I just met James Hughes 30 miles from here. How does he know James Hughes? How does he know that James Hughes knows me? And so then I'm thinking, maybe he's just lying. And he said, Danny Woodley will be here too. And Danny Woodley was another biker guy that I knew and rode with one of the motorcycle clubs I was associated with. So I said, yeah, I can come. Mainly I'm thinking I'll come just to make fun of Danny and James Hughes for showing up. So I went on home, popped open a beer, and I looked at that pistol. And on the door of my apartment, right on the inside of the door, you walk in and shut the door. I had 17 knives just stabbed into my door from where people would pull a knife on me at the bars, and I would whip them and take their knife home and stick it in my door. It was like a trophy case to me. So I pulled one of them knives off and stabbed it through the trigger guard of that little pistol and left it on the door. And then I sat down there and started looking at it and drinking. I started thinking, I am the toughest guy in the world. And then all of a sudden it occurred to me, I am the luckiest guy in the world because you can take the littlest punk around and he could kill somebody with one of those. And I managed to get through this without getting shot. So I thought, something's watching over me. So the next morning, when I got up, I thought, it's Tuesday morning. I thought, I've done blown my image with the nerd at the convenience store. So I'm just going to move a girl in. So I jumped in I had a little MGB convertible and rode down to the strip and walked into one of the clubs and looked around and said, hey, Brenda. And this girl turned around and said, yeah. And I said, you want to move in? She said, yes. She grabbed her little bag of G-strings and came out and jumped in the car. And we're going to head to the house. But on the way to the house, I realized, if you're going to have a girl living with you, there's a few things you got to buy. So we stopped at Walmart, going to pick up some stuff, essential stuff that a guy doesn't need. But if you're going to have a girl living there, you're going to need it, like a shower curtain, some dishes, towels,
Yeah.
food, things like that.
Right.
So we loaded up the car with all this, and then we headed to the house. Got a little microwave and a few things, and we get to the house. And as we're unloading, I look at my watch and I realize, man, it's 5:00, and I told that Christian guy I would come see him at 6. Well, I'm not going to tell her that I'm going to go see a Christian, because as far as I'm concerned, Christians are the farthest thing from cool there is. And I am the coolest guy that I knew,
Yeah.
So, so I just told her, look, there's weed up in the cabinet. There's Coke in the freezer. Make yourself at home. I got to go meet some guys, and I'll be back later. She thought I was going to go meet up with my dealers. So I jumped on my motorcycle, and I was heading over to Jack's place. And on the way over, I thought, what are those two questions? Because, when Christians start ministering to you and witnessing and trying to convert you to Christianity, there's two questions you can ask them to make them shut up because they never know how to answer them, you know? And I don't want nothing to do with Christians. Not only are they nerds, but Christian women are ugly. I don't know if you've ever met any Christian women, but they're just ugly. They got kind of a blue haze to their hair. They're old and they got one of those pins on their lapel
Right.
of that woman made out of ivory. What do they call it? A cameo,
Uh-huh.
Dresses all the way to the floor, no makeup, and then tied up around their neck. I don't want nothing to do with that, with ugly women. In a Christian's house, if you've ever been in a Christian's house, they got crosses on every wall, Bibles on every table, and one of those plastic pictures of Jesus that moves when you walk by it. You look at it and there's Jesus hanging on the cross. You take two steps, look at the same picture, and he's kneeling in the garden. How do they do that? That's crazy.
Right.
And then that other plastic picture of Jesus to where his eyes kind of follow you as you walk across the floor. I don't want nothing to do with any of that. So I'm going to ask my two questions.
Okay.
Here's the first one. If God loves us all and all men are created equal, what about the starving kids in Africa? Every time I've asked a Christian that, they say something dumb like, the Lord works in mysterious ways. But that just doesn't make sense to me,
Yeah.
If you can't answer that, then your God is not serving us, And
Yeah.
then the second question is, if we're in the heart of Tulsa, Oklahoma, Oral Roberts University, and nobody gets along with that guy down there. But it's like, if God is good and perfect and all, why is Oral Roberts always asking for more money? He gets richer and the poor get poorer, and nobody wants to speak against that. So there's no way to answer that. So I'm going to ask those two questions and then take a sip of coffee, thank them for dinner, and bow out. That's my plan.
Wow. Okay. So you have your plan. You know what you're going to do so that you
Yeah,
don't have to worry about what they're going to say.
that's correct.
Yeah.
So I got over to the apartment and I walked up the stairs and walked along apartment number 2, number 3, and then 204, 205, and I knocked on the door. Bang, bang, bang. The door up, and there was this beautiful woman standing there. And I said, I'm sorry, I've got the wrong apartment. I'm looking for Jack. And she said, well, I'm Fonda. I'm Jack's wife. And I thought, well, scratch ugly woman off of the list, So I walked in. There was no crosses, no plastic pictures of Jesus, but there was Jack sitting at the kitchen table, and he's talking to Danny Woodley, my friend, and James Hughes, the guy that I'd met the night before. So he just said, sit down, Jack. So I just sat right to his left. And he was talking to those two. He kind of ignored me the whole night. I was kind of looking in his left ear the whole time and listening to him talk to them. But he started talking about something I never heard of, the love of Jesus. I grew up on the theology of turn or burn. God's going to French fry you. Get saved or go to hell. That's the only theology I ever knew anything about.
Yeah.
I knew Jesus loved the little children, but when you get older, he's mad at you. That's what I thought. And he said, Jesus loves us even as adults, even as sinners, he loves us. And he says, let me show you something. And he calls his little daughter in the room, Jessica. She's like 5 years old with these little bouncy pigtails, one on each side, and ribbons in her hair, and walks up. And he says, Jessica, that's Danny Woodley, that's James Hughes, and this is John Swanger. And he says, this is my daughter, Jessica. So she smiles and waves and giggles and runs back to the bedroom. And he says, let me tell you something. That's my daughter. I'm much bigger and stronger than her. I could twist her arm behind her back and I could make that girl do anything I wanted her to do because I'm more powerful than her. And he says, but that's not the relationship we have. I love her with my whole heart and she loves me. She'll do anything I want because she loves me, not because she's afraid of me. And he said, that's the same relationship I have with Jesus. I obey him not because I'm afraid of him, but because I love him. And something started happening in my heart. I don't know what it was, but I felt like my innards were all twisting up and going the wrong direction, opposite directions. So he kept talking, and then Danny Woodley and James Hughes were sitting across, and James Hughes says to him, Pastor, I want to ask you a question. And Jack says, what's that? And James Hughes says, well, if we're all created equal, what about the starving kids in Africa? And Jack says, well, Jim, obviously you have a heart for mission. We need to get you saved and in the mission field so you can go feed those kids in Africa. And just then, as soon as he got through saying that, Danny Woodley says, well, what about Oral Roberts and all of his money? That ain't right. And Jack says, Danny, do you think Oral Roberts is a hypocrite? And he goes, you dang right I do. And he says, are you telling me that there's a hypocrite standing between you and Christ? And he goes, yes, there is. And he says, you do realize that in order for the hypocrite to be between you and Christ, that means the hypocrite is closer to Christ than you are. He said, God will deal with Oral Roberts just like he'll deal with you. You don't need Oral Roberts as an excuse to go to hell, and Oral Roberts cannot get you into heaven. This is between you and God, not between you and Oral Roberts and God. And I'm sitting there thinking, I've got no questions I can ask. I've got no way to gracefully get out of here. So just then, Jack turned to me, and he looked me in the eye, and he says, well, what are you going to do, John? And I said, I'll be honest with you, Jack. What I'd like to do, I'd like to go home and snort some coke and read the Bible. And he says, let me get you a Bible. And he jumps up to grab a Bible. And I said, if you were a real preacher, you'd be telling me how coking's a sin. I'm going to go to hell. I got to stop all that. He said, no, sir, that's not my job. It's my job to introduce you to Jesus, and it's his job to change your life.
Wow.
Well, he got me a Bible. James Hughes said, I want to go with John. I don't know if he heard cocaine or Bible. It's obvious he was going to go with me. So Jack gave me and him both Bibles. We jumped on our Harleys, and we headed over to my house. We're riding along, and I'm thinking, I'll give this a shot. I'll see what happens. I'm going to read it and see what's going on. And so when we got to the apartment, walked up the back steps of the little 3 steps, and I went to stick the key in the door, and I stopped. I froze. And James Hughes says, what's wrong, John? And I said, I forgot. There's a girl in here. And he said, a girl? And I said, yes. So we did the manly thing. We stuck the Bible up under our belts in the back and zipped up our leathers so nobody could see we had them. And we walked in because the last thing we want is for her to know we've been to some Christian's house or hanging out with the uncool people.
Yeah.
So we walked in, and James Hughes said at the kitchen table, this was like 8 or 9 o'clock at night. He said at the kitchen table, I looked back in the bedroom and I saw that Brenda was asleep. I walked back there and gently pulled the door shut. I went and used the restroom and then walked back out. I don't know what James Hughes smoked or snorted or what, but he was passed out, slobbering on the table, right on top of his Bible. So I turned the lamp on next to the recliner there. I went to the kitchen and I got the mirror on top of the refrigerator down, took the Coke out of the freezer. I had just put an 8-ball in there, and it looked like Brenda had done a couple of lines, but it was almost 3.5 grams of Coke, which is a heck of a lot of Coke.
Yeah.
I got down and I started drawing lines of Coke and snorting and reading and snorting and reading. And by the time morning came, 6 a.m, I had done all 3.5 grams of Coke, and I had read the entire New Testament, and I started having me a conversation with God. I said, God, I don't know if this is real. Some crazy guy in prison could have written this out on toilet paper, and he showed it to the guy in the next cell, and he showed it to 2 guys, and they showed it to 2 each. And next thing you know, 1/3 of the world is believing something that some crazy guy wrote. How do I know that this is real and not Hinduism or Buddhism or Islam or atheism? How do I know I got the right one? I said, you got to prove to me you're real. I said, I'll make a deal with you. When the sun comes up, I will call Goodwill and tell them to come get all this hot merchandise in the apartment. Because, if you're a drug dealer, you're a fence also. I had TVs, VCR, stereos, and toolboxes full of tools all over the apartment. I'm going to donate them all to Goodwill. I'll call the strip and tell them I'm not working in those topless joints anymore. I'll drop out of the motorcycle clubs. I'll quit drinking. I'll quit doing drugs. I'll call my dealers and tell them you got to find a new supplier. And I'll call my wholesaler and tell them I'm out of the picture, not buying any more product. And I'll spend the rest of my life telling people about you and what you did for my life. But you got to prove to me you're real. I said, there's a girl asleep in the bedroom there. If I do this, what I read last night says she can't stay here. So I want her gone. I don't want her hurt and I don't want her mad, but she needs to be gone. I got up and I put the Bible up in the kitchen cabinet and I slid the one out from under James Hughes and put it up there also. And I sat back in the chair and I said to God, you got like 5 minutes, God, or else I got to go to work. Just then the bedroom door opened and Brenda walked out. She walked over and she looked at James Hughes passed out on the table and looked at me sitting in the chair. And she said to me, why didn't you come to bed last night? I said, I don't know. I was just kind of sitting here hanging out. And her eyes got big and she looked at me and she said, you got saved last night, didn't you? I said, yeah, I guess I did. And she said, I should leave then, shouldn't I? I said, yeah, I suppose you should. She grabbed her little bag of G-strings and walked out the door. And as the door shut, I heard God say, I did what you said. Now you do what you said.
Wow.
I called
Wait, John.
Jack.
Joe. So, what do you attribute that to? You think God told her that?
God must have told her.
Yeah.
Because there's no other way she could have known.
Right. That's incredible.
It was shocking. It was shocking to me. But I called Jack and I told him what happened. And I called Goodwill and told him you can have everything in the apartment. I loaded up my guitar and just a few clothes. And Jack and Fonda, the people that led me to the Lord, moved me into their apartment with them. I quit the strip clubs that morning. I spent the whole day separating myself from everything. I called the dealers and said, I'm gone. No more product. I called my wholesaler and said, I'm not buying any more product. And the wholesaler wanted to meet the dealers. The dealers wanted to meet the wholesalers. And I wouldn't introduce any of them to any of them. I quit riding with the motorcycle clubs. And I want to tell you, that was February 2nd, 1983. God delivered me from alcoholism. He delivered me from the addiction of cocaine. I have never once had the desire to touch drugs since that day. I did not have the withdrawal symptoms of cocaine. I did not suffer the palpitating heart, the tanking blood pressure, the overamping, all the symptoms from breaking away from cocaine. I never suffered any of that. It was just gone like it had never been in my life before. I am not an alcoholic. I was an alcoholic at the time, but I am not now. That day I wrote 2 gospel songs. The next day, Jack took me into McAllister State Prison, and he preached, and I sang my songs. And we went there a few times, and then they started doing background checks, and they wouldn't let me back in. When him and his wife graduated from Bible College, the 3 of us moved to Denver, Colorado, where he was from, and started a church there. He preached, and I led worship. And shortly after that, I met my wife and got married, and we started Crossing Cliff Ministries, feeding the homeless. I was just praying one day, and I said, God, please tell me how I can be brighter. Even though I love you and I'm sold out to you, in my heart, I feel like I look like a hardened person. And I think my eyes look like a mean guy. I want to look like a more godly person. And it's not a matter of what my hair looks like or my tattoos. It's a matter of my spirit. And God says, let your light shine. You know, I had a vision of I was in darkness. This was actually a dream. I was in pitch darkness. I couldn't see anything. And then I looked up, and above me there was a flashlight shining down, flailing around all around me. And then finally the flashlight focused in on me. And beside it, a hand reached down toward me. And I grabbed the hand, and it started lifting me up out of this dark hole. And as he lifted me up, he turned around and handed me the flashlight to shine on the next one. And God said, let your light shine into darkness so others too might find the way out. And then I saw a plaque in a bathroom that said the exact same thing. And so I was praying. It was almost like a mantra. Tell me, God, how to let my light shine. And then I read Isaiah 58, 9 and 10. It said, if you do away with the yoke of oppression, the pointing finger, and the malicious talk, and if you spend yourself in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will shine into darkness and your nighttime will become like the noonday. I froze and I'm going, that's my verse. And I backed up and read it again. And what popped out at me is, spend yourself in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed. And I heard God say to me, that doesn't say feed anybody. It doesn't say volunteer. And it doesn't say donate. God said, it tells me, spend yourself.
Yeah.
And that's a long difference between just doing ministry. Immerse your whole self in it forever. And I want to tell you, I'll be 65 years old in about 3 weeks, and I'm not spent yet. I'm still working on that.
Oh, John, I love that. So I've been just listening to your story here, and barely even interjecting because you tell it so powerfully, and I just enjoy listening to you tell it. God's done some amazing things in your life, and he really changed you and convinced you that he wanted to use you.
Yes, he has.
Wow.
I mean, every day that we wake up, and the first thing we say is, God, where do you want us today? What can I do for you?
Mm-hmm.
Me and my wife have dedicated our life to taking care of the people that are on the fringes of society, the hungry, hurting, and the homeless, you know.
Yeah.
And God gave me a mission statement. I have decided that this is my mission statement. I am convinced that without the knowledge of salvation through Jesus, man will perish. Without a personal relationship with Christ, believers will fall away. Therefore, Eric, I am called and determined to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. I am driven to bring Christ onto the pages and into the heart of man. For this I was born, and this I will do so long as God gives me breath. That's what I'm doing. I want to work for those on the fringes of society, the ones that have been forgotten and shoved aside, the ones that are not welcome into our churches, the homeless, the dirty, the nasty, the pierced, the dreadlocked, the tattooed, the ex-cons, the backers. That's what my life is trying to bring in people to Christ or bring Christ to people. I don't want to install Jesus. I just want them to find Christ, and I want them to find him in me.
I love that. Well, give us some examples of how you've seen God use you in those ways to minister to other people.
Oh, I don't know where to start with that because there's just been millions of times, you know. In fact, our second book kind of covers a lot of our
Yeah.
life after coming to know Christ. You know, we have a book out called Shackled: Confessions of a Teenage Bank Robber, and it covers my childhood, my career as a bank robber, and the first 2 years in prison, and the miracles that God did to get us through that. And then And we've been giving those books away in jails. You know, we made a decision that all the money from sales of that book would go toward buying books to give away. Me and my wife have never taken one penny from the sales of Shackled. And all the money goes into a fund. We buy books and give them away in jails and prisons and juvenile halls. We've given away nearly 1,000. And we just finished writing Unshackled, A Story of Redemption, which is the sequel to the first book. Unshackled picks up at the beginning of my third year in prison, and it goes through my life, career, salvation, meeting my wife and marrying her. You know, unlike most people, they have this long engagement. They get to know each other, and they come to a realization that they're going to get married. With me and my wife, she walked into a church. The first time she ever saw me, she saw the back of my head, and God said to her, "That is your husband." She sat down on the front row, not right next to me, but one person over. There was one person between me and her. She kept peeking around this woman at me, and I'm thinking, who is this crazy woman? Keeps looking at me. So when the service was over, she got up and kind of ran around that woman to me and walked up to me, and her first words she ever said to me is, "So who are you anyway?"
Wow.
Like that. I said, "Excuse me," and I heard God say, "This is your wife." We were married 1 month and 20 days later. And we just celebrated a couple of weeks ago, we celebrated our 33rd anniversary, you know,
Oh, that's
and
impressive.
never have I met anybody that would approach life the way that I did.
Yeah.
She will drop everything at the drop of a hat to go follow Jesus. If Jesus says, go do this, we're going to go do it, you
Well,
know?
can I ask you? So, how do you? Because this is not the normal Christian experience, I don't think, or at least what I would, in my experience anyway, that people immediately kind of have this sense of talking with God so intimately, like you describe, and you're listening to Him. How'd you? Where'd that come from? Like, what? How did you develop that?
I don't know. I think it started with just reading His Word. You know, for the first 6 months that I was a believer, while I was waiting for Jack and Fauna to graduate, I had personal tutors, both of them. Jack worked the night shift at the convenience store, and they both went to Bible college from 8 in the morning until noon. And I would sleep on their couch from 8 until noon. And when they got home, Jack would go to bed to get his rest in the afternoon to go to work at night. Fonda would teach me all afternoon, and then when Jack
Mm,
went to work, I would go to work with him, and he would teach me all night. I
yeah.
would read the Bible and pray. You know, I got filled with the Spirit the night after I got saved. I got saved, I don't know, Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, somewhere in there. And Wednesday night, I got filled with the Spirit.
What was that like?
It was amazing. I didn't understand it. You know, we went to Rhema Church where Ken Hagen was. And mind you, I got saved in the middle of the name it and claim it movement, but it never set good with me. I didn't like anything about this me stuff, this me theology. You know, my theology is ask not what God can do for me, ask what I can do for God. That's the theology I want to live by.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I wake up and use me, God, put me somewhere. There's a Hebrew word called Hanani, which means here I am. And it's not here I am like in a roll call. It's here I am as in offering yourself for service. I wake up and I say, Hanani, God, use me. You know,
Yeah.
I made a deal with God a long time ago. You know, you help me, I will take care of those around me. You take care of me. So I don't ask God for anything for me. You know, I probably should, but you know, usually when I ask God for stuff, it's for somebody that I know that needs it. So I kind of live by that theology that He'll take care of me. He wants me to take care of those around me. And as a result of that, you know, people go, well, John, you don't have much money and you don't have much going on in life. You're busy. Oh, you spend all your time doing this. When are you going to get the fancy house or the fancy car? I'm going, I don't need that. And they go, well, God's not doing a very good job of taking care of you. I go, yes, he is. I'm 65 years old and I'm still an air pump, meaning I still suck in air and blow it back out. So
Right.
he's doing his job. He may not be doing his job the way you think he should, but he's doing his job as far as I'm concerned. He's taking care of me, and that's what counts. I just want to serve those that he put in front of my path. You know, I go to the Thanksgiving Eve service, and they have an open mic, and they ask the congregation to come up and go to the mic and tell everybody what you're thankful that God did for you the last year. And I'd listen to people one at a time get up and say, I got a new job. Thank you for my new baby. Thank you for my new car, my new house. We got a new stereo last week, over and over, all this junk. And I got up and I was in tears, and I just stood up and I said, you know, I haven't had time to think about what I want to thank God for giving me. I'm still busy thanking him for what he took away, because God took so much away from me that was killing me. You know, I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, that's so interesting. Yeah, wow, your story is really powerful. Now, I'm sure there's a lot more I want to ask you because there's so much more I'm sure to your story. Um, but you mentioned your first book, Shackled, and people can get that on
Hmm.
Amazon if they wanna read it. It's out there, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But you've written a
It's
second book called Unshackled.
Unshackled,
Yeah,
a story of redemption
yeah, and you said that goes into your kind of life after.
after prison,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
my life with Christ. You know,
Yeah. So people, right now you're raising money to like, I don't remember if you said this or not, but we talked about it beforehand. You're raising money to kind of pay for the editing and the kind of setting of that book.
graphic design.
Yeah, all that kind
Yeah.
of cost. And there's a GoFundMe page. And so, guys, you can get that at gofundme.com/swanger, or just go to halfwaytherepodcast.com, click on the show notes for this page, and I'll be sure to share it on Facebook as well. And I'll link up to the GoFundMe page so that you can contribute to that if you want to hear more of John's story.
Okay. And for the book Shackled, if you just Google the word shackled along with the word Swanger, those two words, it should bring you right to a link for the Amazon page so you can buy my first book.
Perfect. That's great. Wow. Okay. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with us, John?
Just that I love God and I love living this life that he's allowed me to take. This journey has been incredible, and I hope we have many more years of journeying like this. Thank you so much for allowing me to be on your show.
John, thank you so much for sharing your story. I just, like I said, there's a million other questions that I have for you, and we could probably go a whole other hour, but I don't want to keep it too long. Thanks for being here.